My name is P.Staff. I'm an artist. I work mostly with video installation, sculpture, text, poetry. Text and poetry is always woven into these works, but I often get to hide behind them a little bit. And if I'm talking about them, I also usually get to gesture away to something else, right? I usually get to tell you guys to look elsewhere. And so I feel a little more exposed this evening than I'm used to. I had an exhibition at the end of last year at the Bergen Kunstverein that was titled Penetration. The curator of the show, Victor Newman, was the person who suggested publishing a collection that I have called Minimum World of poems from the last 10 years. What is the minimum world? Is kind of the question that's inherent in the phrase itself. I think I was trying to find a way to talk about a state of being, a state of consciousness, a reality that does feel stripped away or kind of reduced to its bare politics or something. In the text and in the poem, it starts off by describing a minimum world, but then it very quickly turns to an irreversible world. And these felt like they were in kind of important dialogue with each other. But there's this sort of micro and macro thing, I think living through particular cultural and political crises of the last couple of years, things feel like a minimum world and like an irreversible world. But there's also this sense of I was trying to also think about that feeling of when you wake up in the morning when something really bad has happened, like a breakup or someone has died, like a very personal thing. And there's that sense of the split second that you wake up and you remember, and it sort of hits you again. And it's, this feeling of the kind of minimum and the irreversible taking hold or something, We all will say things like, oh, it feels heavy. We can feel oppressed by the sun or, these kind of things. I think that there is a sensitivity to the atmosphere and the weather and the feeling of things that we all inhabit. At the same time, I studied astrology very intensely for a number of years. And something that I really appreciated from astrology is this sense that everything has speed, everything has a weight to it, an orbit and a gravity, and understanding how the kind of a faster elliptical movement of a brighter planet can pull another planet into its sphere or release another one to apply or to pull away from and things like this. In my work, I'm not so interested in really spelling out a lot of astrological things, but this sense of, a very material weightedness and everything being sort of connected in that way, was really useful. The planet of Venus became a really useful tool in a way, a thing to think through, because of its similarities to Earth and its differences. On a very simple level, just size-wise, it's the closest. But then as the text in the film describes, it's it has this sort of same mass, but days last far longer, and the pressure would kind of crush you immediately, and the air is full of sulfur and things like that. In quite a kind of simple or maybe even juvenile way, it became a useful way to maybe talk about here and now, but by describing this other place, by describing somewhere else where this atmosphere of violence is so oppressive that it kind of everything is consumed by it. For me, it felt I'm just describing the here and now through another tool. But I get a little hooked on some of these cosmological ideas, gravity comes up a lot. There's another poet who talks about this idea of gravity is this force that shows the world wants you, which I thought was really beautiful. And at the same time, what could possibly be more oppressive than gravity, to be like constantly pulled down. I know Johanna Hedver, who's a good friend and like interlocutor of mine, has talked a lot about this kind of the gravity that keeps you pulled to the bed, to the ground, to the floor. Yeah, and so that kind of ambivalence is interesting to me. I mean, I'm thinking about sensation a lot, and these kind of small, quiet ways that our senses are woken up. You know, I love that feeling that you can have your eyes closed but like sense that someone else has walked into the room, or that we all in some way are understanding our spatial positioning all the time. You know, ideally that's how you stop yourself like banging into the frame of a door or on the side of a table or something. Like often with the works that I'm making, there is a violence to it, or like a threat.
Look at what's in front of you. Boom, boom, boom.
It's not so much aiming for like peak sensation. It's that feeling of just like needing to be aware of your surroundings enough, just enough that you're like I said, that you're tilted off your axis just a little bit. One of my favorite examples of that is a work I made where acid was dripping from the ceiling into these large barrels that would collect the acid over the course of the run of the show. Naturally, your first thought is that acid is dangerous. You know, it's like actually quite a vague scientific term. Like there are many different types of acid that have many different functions, and there are acids that we make in our body, whether it's the stomach, digestive acids in our stomach, or the lactic acids in our muscles. You squeeze a lemon into your drink and it's citric acid, but then there are these other forms that are corrosive or violent or more scary somehow. You know, it has this initial sense like, oh, there's acid dripping from the ceiling. So you're invited in a way to become aware of your surroundings. Like, is something going to drip on me? If it drips on me, would it hurt me? This kind of thing. But the other thing that I liked that it produced was both like a tempo and like a spatial register. Like as the acid is dripping from the ceiling into these barrels, you're like hearing these drips around the gallery, and they're kind of hitting different speeds. You know, I do believe that that immediately changes your internal rhythm. But the other thing is that you could always kind of locate yourself in distance to that sound, you know? And so even if you weren't consciously thinking about it, there was some ability to understand yourself in relation to this work because of the fact there was a suggestion that it could hurt you. You know, the electrical networks, they're generally hung too high to touch, you know, but they still divide a space, they drop the ceiling, they buzz a little. You know, different people describe different feelings of being sensitive or not to this extra electrical charge in the room. But something I like about that work is that it's pulling the electricity out of the building itself. You know, the work is plugged in to the electrical circuit of the institution, the museum, the Kunsthalle, whatever it is. And so it's also in some way like literalizing some volatile material, some volatile force that is in the walls already. It's moving around the space already. I'm just pulling it out and making it more visible somehow. These are like, this is what I mean by these like small twists of the axis, rather than really like throwing a blade at you or something. I like making these works that you kind of have no choice but to be aware of if there are other people in the space with you. Maybe everybody is bathed in the same like neon light, or everybody has to walk under the same electrical net or navigate in some way the same strobing lights or something. It does create this kind of grouping, this sort of collective nervous system. You know, I'm like a terrible scientist. I don't know much about biology, but I do feel like a really sensitive person. a lot of the times the work is just about that. It's just about trying to understand being someone moving through the world, feeling all the time this like sensitivity, this like raw nerve, you know, the nerve that is exposed and is touched and it's over-activated somehow. I remember talking with a curator that I was working with, and we were talking about this film I made that is trying to sort of simulate like a perpetual nighttime or some sort of chronological distempo or whatever. And I was saying to her, like, isn't it just the most like horrific thing to think that the sun just rises and sets every day and it just like repeatedly goes on, you know? And she like didn't share my sentiment at all, you know? And it was one of those moments of feeling like, oh God, I can really get like tortured by the world.
Woof, woof, yep, woof, 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 yep, 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 woof, woof, woof.
I mean, you know, in a way, so much of my thinking is informed by a background in live performance or live works somehow. You know, in my first few years out of art school, I was making live performance works more than anything. In some ways, I feel that I'm still working in that register. Each show, each film is still durational, is still temporal, is still live in some way. But when I was making these more like, you know, traditional live works, I mean, I was kind of fascinated by the feeling of being in the audience versus the feeling of being the performer, the exposure of being the performer, but also, I don't know, it's like these moments where a whole audience are, you know, deciding whether or not to clap at the end of something, or there was a dance piece I made where the main performer was like soaking wet, and they're often kind of getting uncomfortably close to the audience, and there is this neighborliness in deciding whether we're gonna like hold a united front and not move and not react, or whether we as a group will decide to all pull back. Even the sensation of just one person in the room being soaking wet and everyone else being dry and watching them. These were like these little articulations of different types of neighborliness, like kind of nerves, but also there's something in there about exposure. If I'm talking about being this kind of juvenile, sensitive person moving through the world, you do also feel exposed. Like you feel, you know, your coat is not thick enough to keep you warm, the sun is too bright in your eyes or something, and somehow you can catch this feeling in like live performance. But it requires a lot of sensitivity to register what's happening in that way, you know? Yeah, I think at some point it felt politically necessary, but also personally necessary to slightly like reverse the terms of dysphoria, you know, to kind of say that, you know, it could be like the world that is dysphoric rather than the individual. I mean, I forget the exact like linguistic origins, but, you know, I think it's something like that originally dysphoria is about the grief of dislocation. And it was really only through like the updating of like medical language and diagnosis that it became this like shorthand for, most often than not, like people experiencing some sort of gender dysphoria, you know?
The weight of gravity and the weather, are you feeling it? The weight of reality is a tragedy. Home heaven, remedy, constitution is a degradation of energy, and the full rotation of the body, a child ghost, an adult orgasm, release, attention, it's nuclear yet again. You are envious of the air obliterated. You told me once you didn't know that word, obliterated, so I sent you back a whirlwind emoji. You told me once we only escape the law in bursts of light, and I'm relieved at my thumb when it comes out clean. One broken, one clean, one addicted, one angry, one split open. And it's connected to the wrist that's empty of bones and one wet sack. It covers your face in anguish, spinning faster, a voice, it whispers, to you, 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 to you. says, I am alive and you are dead. 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 I am alive and you are dead.
Grief is a substrate in the work that I'm making a lot of the time. This sense that like everything can be normal around you, everything can be peaceful and somehow like deeply wrong at the same time. Yeah, and so often trying to understand this sense that like the calmness in this room right now is predicated on a violence elsewhere, you know, and that these things like have to sit in balance somehow, but that seems unbearable or interminable. You know, again, when I say this, like I really do, I feel like a child. Like I feel like a child expressing an inability to just like accept the world as it is. But at the same time, like I think I ended up wanting to be an artist without really understanding what that meant, because I did find the world like so unbearable that it made no sense to me. So yeah, I feel like everything is dysphoric. I think I'm often wanting to work with like volatile materials. We've talked about electricity and acid. Yeah, I think there's something in there about wanting to speak truthfully about materials, you know, that my desire is not to contain them. It's to instead like find some way of allowing that like free fall to happen. One that is both linguistic and associative, like how I was describing acid, factoring in all these different forms, but also, yeah, I don't know if it's about like setting something free, like releasing the electricity from inside the building and letting it go somewhere else. I mean, of course, there's like a political imperative to it, you know? There's a critique embedded in that of the institution, disciplinary structures, different like ecologies of form or whatever. But yeah, I don't know, there's the thing that also feels more interesting to me is how disturbing it is when you feel like you might throw up in a room where you're not meant to throw up, you know, or you spill a drink. I don't know, they can be these like small gestures that just like disrupt the kind of, I don't know, like pretense of control or orderliness, you know, that feels so specious from the beginning. You know, there's also just like, I think I also have to admit to like the pleasure in it, you know, that there's part of me that like wants to be sick. There's part of me that wants you to be afraid. There's something exciting and like erotic and perverse. I made a bunch of works that were collaged images of like kind of like white skater boys pissing into their own mouths. And it was a trend like with like skaters, almost like a party trick or something. But this idea that you could produce like a waste material and then so frivolously kind of like shoot it back into your own mouth. It's kind of, you know, it's a little bit of like the gleeful anarchy of admitting that it's bad, you know?